So, I think we may have, Lord willing, come to a place in 1 Samuel where we're finally going to start covering some ground. In my scheme of things, I had already planned to basically be done with 1 Samuel by now. But, that being said, we're still only about 2/3 of the way through the book. So hopefully we'll cover about 3 chapters tonight, 20 through 22. But who knows, maybe the Lord will strike us with inspiration. It'll take longer. But, just open to the move of the Spirit here, whatever ends up happening. So Saul has officially come out against David. He has tried to kill him twice at this point, where we've come in the story through chapter 19. Between those 2 times where he attempts to kill David by pinning him to the wall with a spear, he has a conversation with his son Jonathan. And Jonathan kind of, lays out the logic of the situation for his father, which, if there's anything I've found in relationships is sometimes dealing with an emotional situation logically is not super helpful. But in this case, he got through to his father and said, hey, Dad, David has never done anything evil to our family. All he's ever done is good. He has been loyal to us. So why would you intend harm against him? And Saul is like, yeah, you're right. Why would I? So as we go into these preceding chapters tonight, that's going to kind of explain some of the confusion of spirit and of mind that Jonathan has about this situation, why he would believe that his father doesn't intend harm against David, even though it's been kind of clearly laid out for us that he does. So we ended last week with David again being in the presence of Saul and having a spear thrown at him. He flees home to his house, and Saul sends messengers to bring David back to him. And they go, and David's wife helps him get out the back window and pretends that he is sick in bed. And then Saul says, hey, I don't care if he's sick. I'm planning on killing him anyway. He doesn't have to be in pristine condition. Bring him back and I'll kill him in his bed. And so they go back and find out that there is a household idol that has been made to look like him in his bed, like a decoy basically, and gets back to Saul, and Saul has wrath about it and accuses his daughter. And then his daughter lies to her father and says that she did it because David threatened to kill her. And boy, we are diving into an area here that is going to be full of what kind of seem to be innocent lies that are told in order to protect yourself. But we're going to see that those lies end up in death. And it's a very sad situation that we're going to see. And to be honest with y'all, we might not get there tonight. I don't know. We'll see. But that is going to be the end of this trail of lies, is in the death of an innocent family because of lies that are being told. So, and at the same time, we just keep in our minds that we're dealing with a situation that is completely jam-packed with spiritual warfare that is going on. So David flees, he escapes, and he goes to Samuel. They live together for a while. We don't really know how long it is. We're going to see in our study tonight that they're coming up on a new moon festival, which happens once a month. And it seems that David may really have only been gone for a couple to a few weeks at this point with Samuel, because he's expected to show back up at this festival. So he can't have been gone for that long, really. But in this time, it seems that David is going to be learning a lot from Samuel and learning about leadership and about relationship with God, and eventually their position, their place is given up to King Saul, and so he sends people back to hunt David down again, and the Holy Spirit comes upon 3 different groups of messengers and causes them to prophesy, and basically overcomes them, and the Lord has mercy on them, not just putting them to death, but they just engage in a super long worship session, it seems like, with the Lord. And then Saul comes on his own to come after David and Samuel as well. And he also is overcome by the Spirit of God and lies exposed. I think it was interesting. Matt was talking about being undone in the presence of God on Sunday, which that the word being undone literally means for like your belt on your robe to have come undone and you're exposed. And seems like that's kind of what happens to Saul. He is undone before the Lord because he's overcome by the power of the Holy Spirit. So that's where we laid off last week with Saul's clothes being stripped off and laying on the ground, prophesying before Samuel all that day and night. So I'm going to go ahead and pray, and then we'll jump into chapter 20 and move forward from there. Lord, just pray that as we go through your word, you'd give us wisdom and understanding on these events and how they happened and were written for our instruction. And I just pray that you would make clear to us what you would have us to learn from these stories, from these verses, from these things that truly happened to real people leading up to you ultimately. So I pray that you'd give us wisdom as we look at these and just allow our lives to be changed through an understanding and knowledge of your word. Amen. Okay, so starting in chapter 20, we start with the word then. Those thens always force me to go backwards, because when we start with a then, we have to talk about what happened beforehand. So that's why I did a little recap. So it was after King Saul came and was laying on the ground naked prophesying. David flees from Naioth and Ramah, which is where Saul was trying to come to capture him. And he came and said before Jonathan, "What have I done? What is my guilt and what is my sin before your father that he seeks my life?" So we're in an interesting position here. David has a clear and evident trust in Jonathan, which is interesting because Jonathan has never been shown to be anything but completely loyal to his father. So, Jonathan's in a really interesting position between his father, who he loves, and David, who he loves. And I find very often in situations when there's a disagreement or anger between two people, there's often somebody that is caught in the middle who ends up being hurt worse than anybody else. And it really seems to me like Jonathan, he is just stuck in the middle of this situation. And he's stuck between a father who was the anointed one of God and a best friend who was also the anointed one of God. And he has loyalty to his friend and to his covenant that he's made with his friend, and also to his, truthfully biblical loyalty and responsibility to his father. And so what we're going to see, I think, is a very interesting kind of middle path that Jonathan takes right between his father and David. And he is somebody that I feel like all of us could kind of learn from in how he could very easily have just chosen sides, right? He could have said, you know what? My father's clearly lost his mind. The Lord has forsaken him. David is his anointed. So I am choosing David's side and I'm going to be on David's side. Well, there would have been an abdication of God-given responsibility in doing that. Or he could have said, you know what? My father was the anointed. He is going through a hard time right now, but he is the king. I am his son. If I defend my father and his legacy, then I could someday be king too. So I'm going to choose my father's side. Now, Jonathan doesn't do either of those things. What I think is interesting is that the Lord has laid out a path for Jonathan to go right down the middle without having to choose sides between his father or David. And he is able to navigate this without doing evil to either his father or David, which I think is really interesting, right? And it does put him in a position where his life is put in danger and his position and relationship with his father is seemingly damaged, but it is not because he does evil to David or to his father. He truly chooses to do right, even when it is difficult, painful, and not popular. Because, man, it would have been so much easier for Jonathan to just choose a side and to be peaceful with it. And seemingly what he does is he chooses the Lord's side, which in this case happens to be right down the middle between the two. And so obviously David has some kind of understanding of Jonathan's character, because if there was a king that was trying to kill me, I think the last thing I would do would be to go to his son, who was in place to inherit his throne. That would be a really poor idea. It's not very strategic, right? But David understands Jonathan's character, and their souls have been knit together. God has done a work through his Spirit in both of their lives to where they have a much deeper than surface level relationship. And so David knows Jonathan's character, and he goes to him and truly pleads his case with him. He says, "What have I done? What is my guilt and what is my sin before your father that he seeks my life?" And Jonathan said to him, "Far from it, you shall not die. Behold, my father does nothing either great or small without disclosing it to me. Why should my father hide this from me? It is not so." But David vowed again, saying, "Your father knows well that I have found favor in your eyes," and he thinks, "Do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death." So it seems that Jonathan has been put somewhat on the outs in his father's court, because if we go back just a chapter or two, we see that Saul has instructed all of his top guys to capture David and kill him. Evidently, Jonathan does not know about that. And it seems likely that Jonathan also does not know about the fact that his father, again, tried to kill David with a spear in his chambers, because that happened after Saul and Jonathan had this conversation about David not having done any evil to their household. So, there's no indication that Jonathan is being deceitful or lying in any way. It seems that these things are, as David is speaking, they're being hidden from him by his father. And this must be a painful moment for Jonathan to realize that doing the right thing before the Lord has put him on the outs with his father. So Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you say, I will do for you." So regardless of the position that he's been put in and the dilemma that he must be feeling in his heart, he continues to stay loyal in his covenant with David. Now, we see in the Bible instances of covenants, and whenever we see them, it's important to remember that a covenant is something once made that lasts for a lifetime, and somebody is released from it when one of the parties dies. That's how a marriage ends, and that's how a covenant ends, is by one of them dying. So Jonathan does not have the ability or the right to walk away from this covenant that he has made with David, between David and the Lord and himself. And so he knows that, it's kind of interesting sometimes when we run into a situation where we have a hierarchy of responsibilities, right? All of us will encounter that at some point in our lives. And, Jonathan has the responsibility to God. He has a responsibility to David. He has a responsibility to his father. He has a responsibility to the kingdom. He has a responsibility to his family, to his tribe, and to the covenant that he's made between himself and David. And what ends up winning out in this situation is a mixture between the covenant that he's made with David, his relationship with David, and his relationship with God. Those three things come together to be the culmination of this hierarchy of responsibilities in Jonathan's life. So he does what is right before the Lord, and he says, "Whatever you need me to do, I will do it for you." And basically, Jonathan, I think, still has hope that there's misunderstanding that has happened here. And he's like, "Whatever you need me to do to prove to you that this is just a misunderstanding, I will do it." So David says to Jonathan, "Tomorrow is the new moon, and I, interestingly, should not fail to sit at table with the king." So evidently, once a month when the new moon rolls around, because that's how the Jewish calendar was put together, it was a lunar calendar. So once a month, the king would have a feast or a festival at his home or at his court, wherever it happened to be at that time, where his top leaders were responsible, as well as his family, to come together. And, it may be that this is the one time in the month where the king has all of his people together and everybody can get on the same page and, go back out to whatever responsibility is happening. So David knows that he, as the king's son-in-law and as a high commander in the army, he is responsible to be at this festival. So he says, "Tomorrow's the new moon. I should not fail to sit at table with the king, but let me go that I may hide myself in the field until the third day at evening. And if your father misses me at all, then say, David earnestly asked leave of me to run to Bethlehem, his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all of the clan. If he says good, it will be well with your servant, but if he is angry, then know that harm is determined by him. Therefore deal kindly with your servant, for you have brought your servant into a covenant of the Lord with you. But if there is guilt in me, just kill me yourself, for why should you bring me to your father? And Jonathan said, far be it from you. If I knew that it was determined by my father that harm should come to you, would I not tell you? Then David said to Jonathan, who will tell me if your father answers you roughly? Jonathan said to David, come, let us go out into the field. So they both went out into the field. And Jonathan said to David, the Lord, the God of Israel, be witness. When I have sounded out my father about this time tomorrow or the third day, behold, if he is well disposed towards David, then shall I not send and disclose it to you? But should it please my father to do your harm, the Lord do so to Jonathan and more also if I do not disclose it to you and send you away that you may go in safety. So they are putting into place a plan by which Jonathan can secretly sound out his father about his intentions with David. Now, we see a lot of places, especially in the Old Testament, where patriarchs of the faith and leaders of the faith and leaders of the people of Israel, rather than being straightforward and counting on the Lord for their defense, they choose to lie. We see it with Abraham and Sarah. We see it with Isaac and Rebekah. We see it with, there's many other examples I could come up with, but we're starting to see it with now David's wife and now David and Jonathan, and David's going to continue on in this practice. And I think it is important to realize that God, in any of these circumstances, never instructed these people to lie. Because God is not a liar, and God does not instruct man to lie. That's not the way that God operates. And so I do think it's important, especially as, we go about our lives talking to other people who don't have that much of an understanding of the Bible, that just because something is recorded as happening a certain way in the Bible does not mean that God told the person to do it that way, or that God approves of what they did. There's many stories in the Old Testament of things that people did that was going against God's design and his purpose. So just because God's anointed and the son of God's other anointed are conspiring together to lie to the king, that does not mean that God is taking pleasure in the fact that they are going to be lying to the king. I think it's just important to remember that. There's many things in the Old Testament that you could point at, and that truthfully opponents of God point at and say, well, that happened in the Bible. If that's what God approves of, how can you worship that God? Well, that is, obviously manipulative, and it's a very misunderstanding of biblical principles. But again, just because they're doing it this way does not mean that that's how God would have them do it. This lie is only going to lead to more issues. And in fact, we're going to see it leads to Saul trying to pin his own son to the wall with a spear. I have a feeling that if this had been approached in maybe a more straightforward way, that less damage might have been done. Possibly. I don't know. Jonathan knows also that his father is a liar too, because his father is lying to him. So, it's a very tangled web that ends up happening anytime that lies start entering the picture. Has anybody experienced that in your life? How many times does one lie only lead to one lie? It's very uncommon. One lie leads to another lie, that leads to another lie, that leads to another lie, that leads to destruction. And so it is best, as far as it is possible, for us to not lie. Lying is antithetical to God's design for us. Truth is to be spoken, with the caveat that not all truth always has to be spoken. Sometimes if somebody didn't ask, you don't have to say, right? And there's sometimes that oversharing or, telling somebody the truth too much that they didn't even ask for can hurt, right? So the situation of lying is not good, and it's going to lead to death. So ultimately, this deception is going to get the result that they're wanting, but they're out in this field and they're making this plan together. And, Jonathan says, obviously, if my father's well disposed to you, I'll just let somebody know. and they'll just let you know. There won't be any problem. But if there is a problem, we kind of need a different plan. So he says, should it please my father, verse 13, to do you harm, the Lord do so, and even more to me, if I don't disclose it to you. So basically Jonathan's saying, like, let your fate be upon me if I don't let you know, that you may go in safety, and may the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. If I am still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord, that I may not die, and do not cut off your steadfast love from my house forever, when the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. So at this point, does Jonathan know that David is the anointed of the Lord? Well, it has not been told to us that he does. But it's becoming clear in the way that he is speaking that Jonathan knows that the Lord's favor has shifted from the house of Saul to the house of David. And at this point, Jonathan understands that the house of Saul has become an enemy of the house of David, and that the Lord is establishing the house of David, and that the Lord is going to wipe away the enemies of the house of David. What a horrible position Jonathan has been put in by his father's unfaithfulness to the Lord. Terrible. We're going to see this playing out before us throughout all of this, that Jonathan has a son that survives him, that ends up, becoming a member of the court of David, that David's going to remember this promise that he has made to Jonathan, and he is going to uphold that. But Jonathan is just in this position of defeat before it even comes upon him. And so he is more or less, for his sake and for the sake of his family, begging David, when the Lord wipes away your enemies, remember me. Remember what I'm doing for you. Remember our love for one another, and don't carry out vengeance on my household. So Jonathan, he has a true understanding clearly of what is happening at this point. And yet he is still choosing to show loyalty to the anointed one of God, and to play his part in saving the life of David. I do think it's interesting to note that God did not need Jonathan to save David's life. It wasn't necessary. And, what we see playing out here really has more to do with a relationship between David and Jonathan, because David already knows that the king is his enemy. He already knows that. And it seems to me what's happening here is more kind of a ministry to the heart of Jonathan, and a chance for Jonathan to confirm himself as a friend of the Lord and not an enemy. And so in this situation, Jonathan is staying loyal to the Lord in a situation where, man, it would be so much easier for him to take the easy path, but he's choosing not to. So Jonathan made David swear, verse 17, again, by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. Then Jonathan said to him, tomorrow is the new moon, and you will be missed because your seat is empty. On the third day, go down quickly to the place where you hid yourself, and when the matter was in hand, and remained beside the stone heap. So, why the third day? Ceremonially, among the people of Israel, if you are unclean for any number of things, we're not going to go through all of it, but there's many reasons that you would not be clean. You would not be joining a festival or a feast like this. But you have the ability that same night to go through a ritual. When the sun goes down, when you wake up the next morning, you are once again ceremonially clean. So if he's not there the first day, maybe he was unclean. If he wasn't there the second day, maybe there was something more serious that had to be dealt with. But by the third day, there would be no excuse for why David would not be at table. So that's kind of what they're going back and forth and planning here. So that's why we're looking at the third day, because he could be back in that position again if he was unclean. And Jonathan goes on to say that he will shoot 3 arrows to the side of the stone heap, as though he had shot at a mark. And behold, I will send a boy, saying, go find the arrows. If I say to the boy, look, the arrows are on this side of you, take them. So that would be between Jonathan and the boy. Then you are to come, for the Lord, as the Lord lives, it is safe for you and there is no danger. But if I say to the youth, look, the arrows are beyond you, then go. For interestingly, the Lord has sent you away. So Jonathan knows that, despite the fact that God doesn't need Jonathan, God is choosing to use Jonathan to keep David safe in this situation. And Jonathan knows that what he is doing has more than just a physical connotation to it. There's a spiritual aspect to what is happening here as well. Verse 23 says, "And as for the matter of which you and I have spoken, behold, the Lord is between you and me forever." So this covenant is established between the two of them, and God is the guarantee of this covenant. That's a theme that we'll see a lot throughout the Bible, is the Holy Spirit is the guarantee of our covenant with God. That was a common thing for the Israelites, to use God as a guarantee between one another in a covenant. So David, verse 24, hid himself in the field. When the new moon came, the king sat down to eat food. The king sat on his seat, as at other times, on the seat by the wall. Jonathan sat opposite, and Abner sat by Saul's side, but David's place was empty. Yet Saul did not say anything that day, for he thought, "Surely something has happened to him. He is not clean. Surely he is not clean." But on the second day, the day after the new moon, David's place was empty, and Saul said to Jonathan his son, "Why has not the son of Jesse come to the meal either yesterday or today?" So I think it's interesting. We're going to start seeing a pattern where Saul refers to David as the son of Jesse. I think at this point there are many other attributes that could be pointed out about who David is, rather than just being the son of Jesse. But from what I've read, Saul was somewhat trying to put David in his place by just calling him the son of Jesse. He's not even naming him by name. Interestingly, there are multiple sons of Jesse that are in the service of the king as well. And this seems to be an attempt by Saul to just keep David in as lowly of a position as possible by not even referring to him by name. So he says, that where is the son of Jesse? Surely he is not clean. Why has he not come to the meal either yesterday or today? And so now is where the lie enters the picture. Jonathan answers Saul, "David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. He said, 'Let me go, for our clan holds a sacrifice in the city, and my brother has commanded me to be there. So now if I have found favor in your eyes, let me go away and see my brothers. For this reason he has not come to the king's table.' Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan." Now, how many parents in our audience, in our group here, can tell when your child is lying to you? Yeah. Okay, well, that I wasn't going there. But I can just got to the age with Clay where you can see his little gears moving, and boy, I can tell when my son is lying to me. I'm sure most parents can just tell when your kid is lying to you, and it seems that immediately Saul knew that his son was lying to him. Now, it's kind of funny just still picturing this in our minds. Saul is probably 60 or older, or Jonathan is probably 40. So it's not like a young father and a young son. These are two adults at this point, but Saul immediately senses the lie in what is happening here. And his anger is kindled against Jonathan, and he says to him, "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Therefore, send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die." So, division between father and son. I see some debate over whether Saul is being recorded in the Bible as cursing out his son. In the modern vernacular, basically calling his son an SOB. Or whether this is truly an indicator of some kind of division that is happening inside the family of Saul. Whether his wife is, actually what he is saying, a perverse and rebellious woman. Now, I don't really know, because we really don't hear anything about Saul's wife. We get her name, we get this. But it's kind of an interesting thing to think about is, Saul looks at his daughter as someone that would be a snare for David, not in a positive way, obviously. We see that in the household of David, there is an image, a household god. And, there very well could be other influences happening inside the household of Saul. We really don't know. It's an interesting thing to note, whether he is just cursing at his son or whether it's a deeper dive and picture into the dynamics that are happening there. But the important part of what's happening here is that Saul is rebuking his son. And the way that we would say it is, don't you know that if you don't stand up for yourself, David is going to take your kingdom? It seems that Saul thinks that David or that Jonathan should be even more upset about this than he is, right? And he is having frustration over the fact that his son is choosing the Lord over his own kingdom. Because, man, if there's anything that is just human nature, it's wanting other people to be just as involved in our sin as we are, right? Now that Saul has chosen his kingdom over God, it is infuriating to him that his son is choosing God over his kingdom. And it is infuriating enough that when Jonathan answers Saul, why should he be put to death? What has he done? Saul hurls his spear at him. Not just in anger, to strike him. So he is attempting to kill his son. Now, why is that? I don't know. Could just be an outburst of anger, or it could be that Saul has other sons. And we know that he has other sons. And in fact, one of his other sons is going to take the throne after Saul dies. So David doesn't actually take the throne from Saul. He takes it from Saul's son, Ishbal. But it could be that in this moment, when Saul's son has chosen God over his kingdom, Saul says, okay, if that's how you want it, fine, but you have to be taken out of the picture so that I can put another son in your position to take over this kingdom. A son who will care enough about my legacy to go against the will of God to take it from David, or to keep it from David. So it's interesting, in this case, I don't know whether Jonathan truly could have been saved from this division if he had just been straightforward with his father and said that, David is not here because you tried to kill him, and he thinks that you want him dead. Is that true? Now, if he'd have done that, maybe he still would have thrown the spear at him. I don't know, but it's clear that this lie did no good for anybody. And ultimately, what it did, there's no doubt about it, is it somewhat eroded the character of both David and Jonathan. Lies do that. Lies put us in a position of compromise, and they erode our character. There's many things in life that when we do them, they don't destroy us. They don't destroy our character, but they erode it. They chip away at it. And the Lord tells us that if we engage in those things enough times, that our hearts will be hardened. I know people that can lie without even giving it a second thought. I don't believe they started off that way. People start off with what? With a conscience that can either be exercised or suppressed. And, it's an interesting thing. Has anybody ever done something that they felt so bad about, they wondered, man, does the Lord even love me? Am I even a Christian? It's an interesting thing to realize that if we are so far away from the Lord, more than likely, we're not going to feel bad about what we've done. And in fact, our guilt or our conscience is an indicator that we are walking with the Lord. Because if we feel something when we sin, that means that our conscience is still working. That's a good thing, right? That's a really good thing. But that puts us in the position where we have to make a choice. Am I going to listen to my conscience, or am I not going to listen to my conscience? Every time we choose not to listen to our conscience, we suppress it. And the next time, it's a little bit quieter, and a little bit quieter, and a little bit quieter, until eventually we don't even hear it anymore. And so, at the very least, David and Jonathan have put themselves in a position where they're eroding away at their conscience. And now we're going to see, as we continue on, David lies again. And he is in a position where he is just going through, in his own words, the valley of the shadow of death. That's where David believes that he is. He is. But, he continues by saying that he will fear no evil. So he clearly, and this is a beautiful thing, he clearly listens to his conscience. I think that if there's a good example of what the difference is between Saul and David, it's that when Saul erodes away at his conscience, when he sins, he suppresses it. And when David erodes away at his character and his conscience, he listens to it and he repents. That is the major difference between Saul and David, a man who is after God's own heart and a man who is after his own heart. So they lie, they put themselves in this position, and Saul hurls a spear at his son, intending to kill him. And we don't get any indication after this point that Saul continues to try and kill his son, and his son will eventually die with him on the field of battle. But it very well could be that Jonathan's position at this point has been eroded with his father. So Jonathan rises from the table in fierce anger, and he ate no food the second day of the month, for he was grieved, not for himself, for David, because his father had disgraced him. And in the morning, Jonathan went out into the field to the appointment with David, and with him a little boy. And he said to his boy, "Run and find the arrows that I shoot." And as the boy ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. And when the boy came to the place of the arrow that Jonathan had shot, Jonathan called after the boy and said, "Is not the arrow beyond you?" And Jonathan called after the boy, "Hurry, be quick, do not stay." So Jonathan's boy gathered up the arrows and came to his master, but the boy knew nothing. Only Jonathan and David knew the matter. And Jonathan gave his weapons to the boy and said to him, "Go and carry them to the city." As soon as the boy had gone, David rose from beside the stone heap, and he fell on his face to the ground and bowed 3 times. They kissed one another and wept with one another, David weeping the most. And Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, because we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord shall be between me and you, and between my offspring and your offspring forever.'" And he rose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. Now, for all intents and purposes, this is pretty much the end of a beautiful relationship between these two men. Between this day and the day that Jonathan dies on the field of battle with his father, they will meet one more time. We're going to see that in chapter 23 when Jonathan actually goes to the camp of David. But other than that, this is basically it. This is the end of their relationship. And there is great sorrow in both of their hearts. David has lost his home. He's lost his safety. He's lost his position. He's lost his men. He's lost his wife. He's lost his home. He's lost his king. And now the last crutch that he was leaning on has been kicked out from under his arm. He's lost his best friend and his mentor, who he was relying on more than any other person in order to find safety in the physical. So David's crutches are gone. And now comes the time when God is truly going to start working on his heart. It's a principle that we see often in the Bible, that when God intends to use somebody in a powerful way, he allows them to go through suffering in order that they can be equipped to do his work and to do his will and to know his heart. And so David is really entering that valley of the shadow of death now, where he is going to be pursued night and day for his life. He is going to be hiding in the wilderness. He is going to be presented by God with challenges and with tests that he will overcome and prove his character and learn many lessons that he needs to know in order to, interestingly, make Israel into the greatest version of itself that it will ever be, and to lead the greatest army that Israel will ever know, and to have the greatest victories that it will ever know. But he has many things as a young 20-ish-year-old guy that he has to learn before that truly happens. David is not going to ascend to the throne for almost 10 years after the point that we're reading tonight. He's probably about 20 tonight, and he ascends to the throne at 30. So he has many, many challenges that he has to overcome before God brings him to the place where the promises that he's made are fulfilled. Now that's a really interesting thing, because I am confident that if I was David, I probably would have given up before 10 years elapsed. I feel like I probably would have pulled a Moses, found some sheep, and gone into the wilderness and just been like, you know what? I was happy as a shepherd, okay? I mean, I don't need all of this. But David chooses the plan that God has for his life over his own plan. And so that's what we're going to really be going through here in the next few weeks, is David along this journey being strengthened by God. After he's been broken down, he's going to be strengthened. So David comes to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest. So Nob seems to be where the remnants of the tabernacle have been moved to, and this is where the nucleus of worship happens in Israel. If there is a central place of worship, this is where it is. Otherwise, it seems that it happens in everybody's villages and at their own home. So David comes to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech came to meet David trembling and says to him, "Why are you alone, and why is nobody with you?" So remember, from this point, before, David has been going about the king's business, leading large groups of men, going out and raiding, having great victories, coming in and out before the people. This is not the first time that he's come to the priest to inquire of God, but it seems that this is the first time that he's come by himself. So the priest senses that there is something, to use a funny term, something not kosher is happening here right now, right? So David says to Ahimelech the priest, the king, what? Is he going to tell him the truth? No. So the king has charged me with a matter and said to me, "Let no one know anything of the matter about which I send you and with which I have charged you. I have made an appointment with the young men for such and such a place. Now then, what do you have in hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever is here." So David is lying to the priest of God. This is the lie that is going to lead to death. Now, it's not David's death, but this lie directly leads to death. So the priest answers David, "I have no common bread on hand, but there is holy bread. If the young men," so the young men that David supposedly has coming to meet him, "if the young men have kept themselves from women," and David answered the priest, "Truly, women have been kept from us, as always when I go on an expedition." So one lie has already led to another lie, and now to another lie. It just compounds. "The vessels of the young men are holy, even when it is an ordinary journey. How much more today will their vessels be holy?" So the priest gave him the holy bread, for there was no bread there but the bread of the presence, which is removed from before the Lord to be replaced by hot bread on the day it is taken away. So it was the job of one of the priestly family to bake 12 loaves of bread that are laid in remembrance before the Lord on the table of showbread for 7 days. Now, what they were actually laying it on at this point, if they had the table of showbread, if they had any kind of tabernacle, we really don't know. It's not really recorded for us, but they at least are carrying something forward in the instructions that they were given as the priests to put these loaves before the Lord. So it seems, and traditionally, that David is here on the Sabbath. The Sabbath day is the day that the old loaves will be removed from the presence of the Lord. The new loaves will be put in place. Once the old loaves are removed, they become much less holy. They're still holy. They're still intended to be eaten by the male members of the priestly family who are ceremonially clean. So the compromise that's being made here is like, you are male members, you are clean, but you're not of the priestly family, but I will give you the bread because you're in need. This is an example that's used by Jesus to show that the needs of man, the physical needs, are important. And that in certain cases, they can supersede, especially tradition. And in some cases, the procedural law that God has given. When Jesus and his disciples are walking through the field on the Sabbath, they grab, it says ears of corn. It's not actually corn. They're not, grilling and eating corn cobs, but it's just wheat. That's what they would call corn. And they rub it in their hands, blow it off, and eat the grains. And boy, the Pharisees throw a fit over it. They get so upset. And so Jesus, he goes into the whole thing. He says, hey, Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. But, Jesus is using this to show and, pointing back to David. He points back to this example. He's like, hey, do you guys know about David? He was like your king a while ago, right? He actually ate the bread of the presence, even though he wasn't a priest, because these things are given for man. That's what they're for. And so David is in this position of need, even though he is lying to the priest at this point, he gets these loaves of bread that have been removed from the presence of God. And now we get into the bad news. Verse 7 says that a certain man of the servants of Saul was there on that day, detained before the Lord. I would love to know what that means, but I cannot find really anything good about what this means, that he is detained before the Lord. Some believe that he was like in torment of spirit, that he was like under spiritual bondage. So he was at the place where the priests are trying to be freed from this like spiritual bondage, or that he had actually done something that caused him to be like arrested by the priesthood and be detained before the Lord. It's not really clear, but the fact that he is there is going to be bad news. So his name is Doeg the Edomite, the chief of Saul's herdsmen. And David said to Ahimelech, then have not you here a spear or sword at hand? For I have brought neither sword nor weapons with me, because the king's business required haste. Now, David is getting to the point of just totally improbable lies at this point. Like, that doesn't even make sense. But the priest says, well, the sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom you struck down in the valley of Elah, it's here wrapped up in a cloth behind the ephod. If you will take that, then take it, for there is none but that here. And David said, there is none like that. Give it to me. So this is an interesting heart that David has towards this situation. So David, he has been spending years in the court of the king as the commander of men. David seemingly has had a bit of a transition in his outlook on life from a young man with a sling and 5 stones who goes into battle against a giant, knocks him down, either kills him or stuns him. I don't really know exactly, but, takes him down with this stone and then uses his sword, almost symbolically, uses the giant's sword to remove the giant's head from him. So in that moment, David had rejected the wisdom of man to go with the wisdom of God. He had rejected the weapons that he had not tested for the ones that he had. And he went into battle that way. And he's been spending years and years of his life going out with men, with swords, with spears, with shields, fighting in the physical. And it seems that David's perspective has somewhat changed on what warfare is all about. And I think he's going to have to spend some time with the Lord learning that warfare is not about the weapons that you wield, but it's about the God who is fighting on your behalf. We've gone through, as the people came into the land, God said, hey, I'm not going to remove everybody all at once so that the generations that come after you can learn how to fight. And when we read that, we talked about that was not really about the young men learning how to shoot a bow and arrow or learning how to use a sword or a spear, but it was about the young men learning how to depend on the Lord to fight their battles for them. And David seems like he's kind of gone away from that a little bit. And he is kind of stoked that the sword of Goliath happens to be here. And, it seems kind of symbolic of a shift that's happened in him. And it almost seems as though God is seeing this change that's happened in David and said, you know what, this isn't going to work. We're going to have to take these physical crutches away so that I can build you back up into the man that I need you to be. It could even be said that David is somewhat kind of walked away from his first love a little bit, that he is not depending so much on the strength of God, but he is depending on his own strength. And the Lord is going to truly break that down in him. So David, verse 10, rises and flees from Saul, and he goes from Saul to Achish, the king of Gath. And the servants of Achish say to him, is this not David, the king of the land? Did they not sing to one another of him in dances? Saul has struck down his thousands and David his tens of thousands. Now, that would be especially offensive to the Philistines because at least some of those tens of thousands that David has struck down are Philistines, right? They were the perennial enemies of Israel. So it's interesting. Why do these Philistines see David as the king of the land? I'm not really sure. Maybe it could just be a translational thing where they are calling him a leader of the people of Israel. I don't think that they actually think he is the king, because the Philistines are clearly aware that Saul is the king of Israel. They're the ones that fight against him. So it may just be an interesting translation thing, but one way or the other, they're saying, hey, what is this guy, our enemy, what is he doing here? And David hears these words and he takes them to heart, and he is much afraid of Achish, king of Gath. So he changed his behavior before them and he pretends to be insane. Okay. Now, I think, y'all, what we're looking at here is a bit of a roller coaster. And David is still he is on the downhill. He's going downhill. He changes his behavior and pretends to be insane in their hands. And he scratched and made marks on the doors of the gate and let the spittle run down on his beard. Now, that's a sad downfall from, the anointing oil of Samuel. Has been replaced by his own spittle, pretending to be an insane man. So Achish said to his servants, "Behold, you see the man is mad. Why have you brought him to me? Do I lack madmen that you have brought this fellow in to behave as a madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house?" So this is actually kind of interesting. He wasn't just being funny, which, like, to us reading that, it just sounds funny. Like, do I really lack madmen? But no, what the Philistines and Canaanites would use madmen and women, people who have lost their mind, believing that they could practice divination through somebody who has lost their mind. And so, just as some cultures will, use the guts of a chicken or, just like whatever kind of, tea leaves in China, like any kind of interesting practice that people would use to practice divination and try to understand the future or find a sign. Seems that the Canaanites and the Philistines specifically would listen to the utterances of madmen in order to divine, which, kind of on the surface level, it sounds crazy and just hilarious. But, if you take it to another level, in this time, many of those who are mad were demon possessed. That's just a fact. See all the way through the time of Jesus. And so if they were demon possessed, if they were madmen because they were demon possessed, then in an interesting kind of way, those who were trying to divine through them might have actually had something going on. Like they may have actually had effective divination through madmen who are possessed by a demon. I know this sounds crazy, but I think this is truly the reality of what was going on here. So basically, Achish is like, hey, I've got enough crazy people. Genuinely, I don't need any more, so don't bring him here. So that's where we're going to leave off tonight. I really wanted to go through chapter 22, but I just cannot stop myself from talking, apparently. So we're going to see next week that David departs from there, and he escapes to a cave. Kind of a band of men come around him, and I alluded to this a lot, so I'm just going to go forth and say what happens. But David's lie to the priest in the presence of this servant of Saul ends in Saul believing that the priests conspired with David to help him, and this man Doeg ends up putting the entire priestly family to death. So, and David is going to end in talking to the one man that survives, Abiathar, saying, "Stay with me. Do not be afraid for he who seeks your life seeks mine. With me you shall be in safekeeping." But he admits to him, "I knew on the day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul, 'This is a truth that is spoken from David's lips. I have occasioned the death of all the persons in your father's house.'" So David, this may be kind of the sort of like the bottom part, right? I think he is kind of bottomed out here. He has understood that not only his presence in seeking help from the priesthood got them killed, but even more than that, his lie to them got them killed. And so David did not kill them. And, I really think before the Lord, these murders are on the head of Saul and on the head of Doeg and, whoever helped him, because I really doubt one guy killed 85 people. But, David, he has a true understanding of his responsibility in this. So we're going to continue on next week in chapter 22. If y'all want to read ahead, there's some interesting stuff there, but we're going to close up with that tonight. Lord, just pray that you would just help us to be truth tellers in our lives, Lord. Gosh, it seems sometimes telling the truth is so much harder. But at the end of the day, the truth is what sets us free. And you tell us that nothing that is done in hiding and in darkness will not be brought to light. I know I didn't say that exactly right, but that's what you say, that those things will be brought to light. And so, Lord, help us to be truth tellers. Help us to be people who tell the most important truth, which is sharing the gospel with others, Lord. That is the most important truth that we can tell, and one that, truthfully, we try to hide from sometimes when it's uncomfortable. But Lord, let us be bold truth tellers for you. Amen. Okay. Did you have a...